Cool.
It's Wednesday, May 21st, 2014, and this is the Product Mentor Talk. Today we're joined by one of our mentors, Matt Rogish, founder of Context-Free Software, and he's going to be leading a talk today in implementing continuous product delivery. Just allow me to briefly explain the format. The people you'll see in the room now and who might be joining us in a little while are mentors and mentees in the Product Mentor program, participants from all around the world, headquartered here in New York City. People will be asking questions here, as well as if you're joining us and you're not in the room, you're already looking at our live stream, and down below is the Google moderator area at theproductmentor.com/live, where you yourself can also post questions. And as they come in, I'll be interrupting Matt and posing your questions to him and keeping the whole conversation going. So I want to just kind of do a quick around the room introduction. The room's a little smaller right now, so that won't take too long. So I'm going to start with Christina.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Christina, and I'm a project manager for an ed tech company in Brooklyn, and I'm hoping to make the transition from project management to product management, and I'm lucky enough to have Matt as my mentor.
Okay. And Matt, quick intro.
Hi, I'm Matt Rogish, as Jeremy said, and I am the founder of a software company, virtual software company, but based out of Philadelphia as of last week, called Context-Free Software, and I've been doing software engineering and product development for, I just did the math, 15 years now, which is a long time, so happy to be here.
Awesome. Again, post your questions to Google Moderator. That first question is always the special one. And I am Jeremy Horn, a.k.a. the Product Guy, and I'll be moderating tonight and keeping the conversation going smoothly and making sure all your questions go to Matt. Try to keep the questions on topic to what Matt's talking about. But if you have some generic product management questions, I'll kind of save them for the end of the talk, and we'll see how Matt does with a random question and topics that could be from anywhere. We'll see how that goes. So with all that said, I'm going to hand over to you now, Matt, to start the conversation.
Great. So, as Jeremy said, we're going to be talking about implementing continuous product delivery. My name is Matt Rogish, and it's my website and my Twitter. Those are the two easiest places to reach me, so feel free to do that. As Jeremy said, he'll interrupt with questions, which is totally fine. So a little bit about me. As I said before, I've been a programmer, primarily Ruby on Rails, and a database administrator for a very long time. Well, obviously Rails is relatively new, but CTO and Director of Product Development, consultant in the New York City and Philadelphia area doing lean product development, lean startups, and then a founder of a software company. So what we're going to talk about today is continuous delivery. And if you go look on Wikipedia, you'll get this really very wordy paragraph. I'm not going to read it because basically it boils down to when you have continuous delivery enabled on your software product, any code commit that you have in your master branch may be released to customers at any point. And so this talk is going to explain why this is interesting to us and set some of the foundations both on a process, a people, and a product side that we have to do to make this actually work. And so, first of all, let's talk a little bit about the why on a very high level. I'll go through and I'll explain each of these points throughout the presentation, so trust me that these things will be explained throughout the course of the presentation, so don't ask me right now, like, well, why does it make everybody happier? I will show you. So why do we do continuous delivery or continuous deployment? The big piece that's kind of visible is we get product to customers and stakeholders faster. We're continuously releasing the, I guess you could say, master branch to customers. Now, a lot of this mostly pertains to web software. If you're shipping CDs or DVDs or whatever the heck it is, physical software, you really can't do that. You still need to have release cycles, but for the most part, all of this works for web software. If you're not doing web software, you can do some of these things, and some of them are actually still valuable, but you just can't release 10 times a day because obviously that doesn't make any sense. It also allows us to reduce disruption caused by bugs. it's a pretty common phenomenon when you're creating software products to have a bug that pops up like the day of a release, and you've already got a branch cut or a release system train that's out the door, and you're like, oh, how do we get this bug, in QA'd and through the right processes in order to land them on master and get it deployed that day? It can be a big headache. The product ends up becoming more valuable, and what I mean by that is we can release working software to customers faster. So at any given moment, the product is as valuable as it can be, instead of batching up features for release, at the end of the week or the end of the month. We're able to do it on a continuous fashion. And it makes everybody happier. And by everyone, I mean programmers, product managers, QA, operations, business folks, users. Everybody ends up winning with this type of a system. You'll just have to trust me as we get through that. So this is the continuous delivery pyramid, or the foundations for continuous delivery, I guess, as I have kind of put it together. One we'll call Agile, kind of at the foundation of the pyramid. We'll explore that a little bit. We'll talk about Kanban and some of the implications of that as it relates to Scrum. And then we'll look at something called feature flags, which allow us to toggle features on and off. So first, let's go back to the mid-90s or the early 90s, the bad old days, the 80s, the 70s, where we talk about Waterfall. So Waterfall, as many of you probably know, is a very structured, rigid release process or software product development process where the implementation and design, requirements, verification, maintenance, etc., all flows downhill, I guess, as a waterfall would look. And so as the requirements are gathered and written, they're all handed off in a big chunk to design for software architecture, user experience design, etc. That all of those design documents and specifications are then thrown over the wall to the software engineering team, who spends 2 years building everything that was envisioned in the first 2 steps. Then that's thrown over the wall to QA. They do their QA process, and then the project enters what we call maintenance mode, where presumably you stop working on it. I'm a little bit fuzzy on that last part. So the big component of that is this Gantt chart kind of a thing, which presumably allows you to tell that on February 22nd we're going to have this particular thing done, and you can set up critical pathing and all this other kind of stuff, which can be kind of an interesting document, but it's kind of in support of that. I've been doing Agile software since the late 90s, and I wasn't really sure that a lot of people were still doing Waterfall, and apparently it's still a thing where people are talking about it, which kind of comes a little bit as a shock to me, and it just is in this day and age. It was kind of interesting to me that a lot of people are still doing it, because some of the drawbacks to Waterfall, as has been pointed out a lot, I'm not making these up on my own. The process is resistant to change, obviously. If it turns out that we misspecified a feature, which we often do, it's very difficult to go back and take it through those steps again. Releases take forever, obviously, because we're releasing on fairly either scheduled, because we say, cool, these things are going to be done, and it's May now, and they're going to be done at the end of July, so that'll be our next release. So we have all this batching that takes place, and I think kind of the biggest downfall or problem with Waterfall is it makes too many assumptions, and I'm a big proponent of lean product development, which tries to identify that assumptions and validate them. So when we look at the assumptions that I think Waterfall makes that are bad, we have some people risk in that the Gantt chart we saw before relies on the teams to be static, which is very rarely the case. People join, people leave teams. If you've ever read The Mythical Man Month, you know what happens when you add more people to a late project. We have process risk, in that if we identify or uncover ways to improve our software development or our product development processes, depending on what phase of the project we're in, we can't really implement them, or those improvements won't be reflected in the work that we've done to date. So if we're past the requirement stage, but we found a really cool way of halving the amount of time it takes to do a requirements document, like we can't use it on this project. And again, the biggest one, I think, is product risk. If we last talked to the users a year and a half ago, and we've been implementing ever since then, it's highly likely that the universe that existed a year and a half ago no longer exists today. And so we know that some of those things are wrong. We don't know what's wrong. We don't know what has changed in the universe. And so the longer we go from releasing software, the longer we go from when we talk to the user from when we release the software, the larger the product risk. So, an example of some control in Waterfall. Waterfall kind of comes down to, I think, this illusion or this concept of software control. And what software projects or products are more valuable? Project A, which will eventually cost about $1 million and produce value of around $1.1 million, or Project B will cost about $1 million but produce value of more than $50 million. It kind of shows that this highly structured process of high controls really only matters in the software projects that aren't very valuable, and software projects that are more valuable don't require as much control. And so Tom DeMarco of Peopleware fame put a quote around that concept, and he's saying, to my mind, the question that's much more important than how to control a software project is, why on earth are we doing so many projects that deliver such marginal value? And so, that's just a little aside talking about Waterfall. So now let's talk about Agile, which I assume most of the people on the call and the most people that are viewing this will be doing. Agile, as this chart shows, which is a pretty complicated chart, I just found it because I think there's a lot of stuff that's packed into Agile, and I can't unpack all of that. And like I said, I think a lot of the people on the call are going to be doing Agile. Agile starts with a series of cadences that might be daily, in terms of continuous integration, continuous building, test-driven development, continuous collaboration if we look at stand-ups. And then the cadence can increase to an iteration, which might be weekly or every 2 weeks or once a month, whatever your team happens to do. And so you have iteration planning, and you have review, and you have retrospectives. Then you do some releases, and it kind of all goes from this core of this iterative environment. So why Agile is interesting to us, it attempts to minimize assumptions and risk via continuous iteration. So instead of doing design for 6 months and then implementation for a year and then finally releasing to the user 2 years after you talked with them, we try to talk to the user relatively quickly to minimize the distance or the time between talking with them and actually releasing something. And so we're going to iterate on everything. We iterate on the product, we iterate on our processes, we iterate on teams and how we have them organized. It's a highly iterative process. Some of the building blocks, I guess you could say, of Agile are a high degree of test coverage, continuous integration, we do refactoring, we do retrospectives to try to improve our processes and the way we build software, and it kind of comes down to this core of continuous improvement. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on Agile. As I said, I think we all mostly do it, and if not, I can explain more. But that's kind of the fundamental basis of this pyramid. You cannot do continuous delivery with Waterfall. You need an iterative, much more shortened development timelines in order to get this out. So now let's talk about Kanban. When I was presenting this here, some of these words and some of these processes here are actually not Agile. And by not Agile, I don't mean that they're against Agile principles. I mean that the people have conflated Scrum, the process of Scrum, with if you're doing Agile, you must be doing Scrum. And my argument is that that's not true. You can be Agile and not do Scrum, because if you look at the Agile manifesto, it talks nothing about doing daily stand-ups and doing a weekly iteration planning on a Monday and doing a closeout of your iteration and time boxing on Friday, like many of us do, like I have done in the past. And nothing in this list here says that that's what Agile really is. Agile is much more of these core fundamental concepts. And so Kanban or Scrum still prescribes some releases that create what we call waste. So Kanban and the lean process is taken from the Toyota production system, and it says we want to try to minimize what we call waste. And traditionally, there are 3 kinds of waste. You can Google Muda, I don't know, I'm not pronouncing those correctly, Mura and Murray. There are regular wastes, which is Muda, which might be overbuilding something that doesn't need to be there. So if nobody is going to try and edit a particular widget after you've created it, having the development team build a really nice edit screen is a form of waste. Mura is a form of unevenness, so that could be where you have a whole lot of work that might be thrown on a developer or a PM or something that requires them to work over the weekend or something like that. And then overburden, which is a way of looking at when you're just trying to do too much. So the software is trying to do something that it fundamentally can't do. If you have 1,000 records, it works fine, but if 1,000,000, it doesn't work. That's a form of waste as well. So the first thing we'll kind of look at as it comes to Kanban is what we're going to call inventory. And in the Toyota production system, inventory is essentially parts of a car or even a car. And what you don't want to have is a giant warehouse or a boat full of cars that nobody wants to buy. In the product concept, inventory could be feature backlogs, undeployed features, or unfixed bugs. So when you think about a feature backlog, let's say I've got a backlog that goes out 6 to 10 months. You know, we've all had really large backlogs where we just scroll through it and it's just page after page after page of feature. As a user, I want to do this. As an admin, I want to do that. And you know, go back and look at some of your oldest features that are still in your backlog and see if they're still valid. See if the assumptions at the time still hold that an admin wants to do X or a user wants to do Y. The fact that somebody had to spend the time to type that in and that you have to scroll past them, you know, every single day to actually get your job done is a form of inventory, which is a form of waste. We also call undeployed features inventory as well, because just like a car sitting in Toyota's plant, it's waiting for a customer. And the more cars sitting on the plant, the longer they sit there, the greater the risk inherent that a competitor will come along and produce a new car that will cause customers to lose favor and not want to purchase that automobile, or if you produce a whole factory full of red cars, for example, and nobody wants to buy a red car. So we could call an undeployed feature a form of inventory as well. So if I'm finished with feature X or something and the release isn't for another 3 weeks, I have delivered value. I have not delivered any value as a product person. Yes, it's done in a sense of nobody is working on it anymore, but until it gets out to the customer, I've really delivered no value. And so the longer it sits waiting to be delivered, the bigger the inventory risk. And then what you could call unfixed bugs or bugs are a form of inventory as well. For similar reasons, or waste. They reflect rework that I have to do, so defects are a form of waste. And sitting in my backlog, having all of these bugs, it's a form of waste in a very similar way to the way feature backlogs work. I'd be curious, I have done this more than once at other times before I've adopted a policy, but we've had bug bankruptcy where we go through our bug tracker and we see bugs from 2 or 3 or 4 years ago that are, when the user types ABC123 into the price field, it crashes. I don't know if that's still a bug or not because we've completely rewritten that feature. I'm pretty sure that's not a bug, but the fact that it was entered into the system, nobody took action on it, and it's still there 2 years later is a form of waste because A, somebody had to take all the time to enter that bug and it was never fixed, and then B, if we chose not to fix it for whatever reason, leaving it in the system in a way that complicates my life as a product person takes away time that I could spend somewhere else. So that's why we call unfixed bugs a form of waste. So what we want to do with Kanban is minimize all of these things. So Kanban is what I believe, I don't remember the actual definition of Kanban. I think it's bucket is the actual translation. So Kanban is essentially a continuous flow system where backlog items get dropped in, they get prioritized, they get moved through the system, and then they get released in one continuous flow. And there's a number of assumptions and different processes involved in this. There are work in process limits, there are different metrics. We have cycle time, lead time. I'm not going to talk about those. I'm just trying to present an overview of Kanban here that gets the point across, which is instead of having a weekly sprint planning where we try to sit down and we go, okay, let's negotiate on what we're going to release this week, that's gone in favor of you pick up whatever's the top of the queue and you take it through until you're done with it, and then you pick up the next one. And so gone is the 2-hour meeting with everybody on the product team, which will cost your company $20,000. In favor of that is a continuous flow where as soon as I'm done with something, I go back to the list and I pick up the thing off the top and I take that through. So that allows me to have a visualization of the whole process, and then allows me to work as efficiently and as quickly as possible to move on to the next thing. So again, it's continuous one-piece pull-based flow. When I'm done with a particular feature, I now have the ability to start a new one, so I do that. We minimize inventory and waste by getting rid of some of the ceremony in Scrum by having the iteration planning meetings and closing out iterations. Features can be released when they're finished. They don't have to be, but as you'll see, it's more interesting when they are, and it's pulled from the Toyota production system. So if you're interested to learn more and to really dive into the nitty-gritty of Kanban, which I hope you do, just Google Toyota production system and you can learn more about it. So that represents the middle part, or the second part of the pyramid. We talked about Agile and why we need that over something like Waterfall. We looked at Scrum and we said, okay, here's why Scrum doesn't really allow me to do continuous delivery, so we need to use something like Kanban. And now we're going to talk about the tip of the pyramid, or the last thing, which is called a feature flag. Now, this is probably self-explanatory, but essentially what a feature flag allows me to do is create a Boolean, a toggle in a file, a config file in code or somewhere that allows me to turn features on and off. That's all there really is to it. So here, this is some pseudocode that shows pet survey true or false, and then it wraps in the UI the button to show the pet survey in this toggle. So if the toggle is turned on, it will show the pet survey. If it's turned off, it will not show it. And all of this happens at runtime. This doesn't happen at compile time or deployment or something like that. It's designed to be toggled at real time. Many of the libraries that you might use in your products, in your engineering side, come with dashboards. So the cool thing with feature flags are that you can roll them out to different people. You can roll them out to particular users or user groups. So you might have a labs feature like Google does, where you can enable certain features for users that have indicated they want to opt in. They might be a little bit more adventurous. They might want to see features that haven't quite been used yet. Or you might want to roll it out to a small portion of your users, a randomly sampled pick of 10% of your users. If the feature explodes and causes some problems, either corrupts data or something really terrible, then you've limited the damage. And if the feature doesn't achieve whatever business metrics, I think Andrew presented a couple weeks ago about how you do backlog prioritization, and for all the features you release, there should be, well, maybe not all of them, but the best that you can, your features should be tied to some KPIs or business metrics. And so, hey, we're going to roll out feature X. We think it's going to move retention or it's going to increase signups. Okay, let's release it, but why release it to 100% of your web traffic? Because what if it decreases signups? What if it decreases conversions or sales? You don't want that to negatively impact your whole business. You want to roll it out to 10% or some small group of your users and see what happens. If everything looks good, then you can roll it out to the rest, or you can turn it off. And this is a feature board from Etsy. Etsy is a big proponent of feature flags and continuous deployment. The horizontal lines are releases, which have, you can see there, this is a 2-hour running thing, and they've released 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times in 2 hours. And they have all these various metrics. Some of them are sales. If you do a release and sales drops to 0, you just broke something. So you can roll that release back. If searches all of a sudden disappear, or you see any kind of abnormal system, you can roll back that feature, turn it off, essentially, instead of rolling it back, and figure out what went wrong, and then roll forward. So Etsy has this on their wall, and thank you for testing. I think the real interesting part of feature flags from a product side, which is often underlooked, is that it gives us the ability in the infrastructure to start doing tests with our users with actual features. So we want to run hypothesis testing before we do a feature. So let's say we think that increasing the sign-up flow efficiency will give us more sign-ups. So we can do some experiments around that, but we won't know until it's actually implemented whether or not it does that thing. And feature flagging builds in the ability for us to go, okay, I think this feature is going to change this metric in a positive direction. Let's roll it out to a small number of people and see if it actually does that. And I think that's kind of the underrated secret of feature flagging, is that it now enables you to do a whole bunch of really interesting things and deliver more value more consistently as a whole than you could without it. And it can create a release log and all of this other sort of thing. But I think what's interesting too is in traditional release management, we may have marketing or sales or account management, customer support, who are asking us, is it done yet? Is it done yet? When's it going to be done? Is that feature going to be included in the next release? Because their work depends on our features being ready for them to do their thing. What's really cool about this is if you can give marketing or account management or sales or somebody the ability to toggle features on and off. You can give them the ability to see a feature as it's being developed, so that if marketing wants to put together a release log or a newsletter or any of those other things that add a lot of value to the customer experience and customer lifecycle management, they don't have to wait until everything is done to do their stuff or to organize their resources appropriately. You can say the UI is fixed, the code behind it doesn't work yet, but you can go ahead and take your screenshots now. It's on production because the feature flag is turned off for everybody but marketing on this one server. So log in, you can see it, tell me what you think, If it looks good, take your screenshots, prepare your stuff now, and when it's ready, just turn it on. And I think that gives the rest of the business not only the power to do acceptance testing in production if they want, but it gives them the ability to do their jobs more easily without nagging you about when this thing is going to be done. And it allows them to see features as they're developing as well. So I've always been asked, in my various roles, like, well, how far are we done? And this gives you the ability to say, well, look, it's up there. Like, we're almost done. You can use it. And if they've been following along at home, they know this and they don't have to ask you anymore. So I think feature flags, to kind of sum up, you can turn them on and off in code or a dashboard. You can toggle them for particular users groups, environments, percentages of users, etc. You can turn them off if something blows up, if the data looks goofy, if some KPIs go down, if it just fundamentally doesn't work. And you can give your other users of your organization, your coworkers, your colleagues, your business users, whatever you want to call them, control over what gets released and when, if you want to. So that's kind of the whole continuous delivery stack. We start with an Agile foundation.
So I wanted to just jump in right there just briefly, Matt. We've got a question from Christina in the room, so I'm going to toss over to her for her to ask her question.
Hey, Matt, I don't know if you're going to cover this later on, but I'm just curious, are there reasons that organizations push back against continuous integration?
So the reasons that I have seen, one is, well, we don't need it. Why would we? All right, so that's kind of the biggest push that I have gotten, is that, well, like, it seems like a lot of work. Like, why would we do that? Mm-hmm. And so, I hoped to indicate in this presentation, like, there's a whole lot of actual reasons why we should do this.
Right.
But there's a lot of work, as you can see. You need to have good test coverage. You need to have feature flags. You need to have the right release process where you've got all the different servers. Like, it's a lot of work to get there. So the biggest blocker, I would say, to this is companies going, you know what, that's not that important to us. And I would argue that all those other features of continuous deployment or continuous delivery, they're both kind of the same thing, is that it makes everybody's lives easier and better. And so there's probably a retention story there too of your engineers are going to like it more. They're going to have to do less work. QA can happen in place. So I can be QAing a feature as it's being developed. I can write my automated scripts. I don't have to get, a lot of people have a process where developers will implement a feature and then throw it over the wall to QA, and then everybody's always yelling at QA, why is it not done yet? I want to release this. And it gives product management the ability to run tests that they couldn't run before very easily, in terms of, I want to test this feature against 10% of our users, and I want to track these 3 metrics. And without all of this infrastructure in place, it becomes very difficult to do that. So I haven't heard anything else, and I'd be curious if there are other people on the call that have heard a pushback of something other than that. But ultimately, the only things I have heard is just, I don't, why would we do it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess. So you're saying that it's really difficult to do continuous integration if you're doing Scrum, like you do sprint planning, and you kind of your team is sort of set up in that way, like that's how they break down work and they organize it.
Well, because at least in high ceremony Scrum, you've got sprint planning. And you've got people committing and time boxing, by the end of the sprint we're going to have this release. The product may or may not be in a releasable state at the end of that thing.
Right.
Sometimes you often have like features that are half done by the Friday that's done. And you also have a demo that you show people, etc. And so the process is a lot more static and assumes like this little iterative chunk which at some point comes a release that all that stuff gets thrown into. And so, you can still do some of those things, but the problem is that I can't, because of the way Scrum is generally set up and the way that the processes are more or less mandated, I can't do a deployment at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, even though I'm done and master is clean, because I haven't demoed it to the user yet, or to the business user, or the product owner. And so how do I do that in a normal Scrum type context? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I guess there's one thing that was confusing me about this, and one clarifying question. In continuous integration, you release before you QA, like the QA engineer takes it and the product owner accepts it, so you do QA and acceptance in the production environment? Or is that completely, it was kind of not clear on the process there.
Sure. So essentially, yes. You can have a QA environment, and I would encourage you to still do that, because in QA you've got the data set up in a really nice way. You may have set up some tests to show that this bug ends up getting fixed. But if you've wrapped your feature in a feature flag, it's going to be turned off for everybody else in production. So acceptance testing can still happen on another environment. It can also happen in production, and then once QA or the product owner or whomever has said, yep, that's good, you just turn the flag on. Instead of that triggering a merge to master and then getting it on the release train, essentially the acceptance toggles the bit to turn it on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay.
So this process does not, you can still have a QA and an acceptance process as part of this. I have done it with that. You just basically have QA and both see it as it happens, which is really cool, because QA can see it kind of evolving on master, and so they can be testing it as they go along. So they're doing a form of continuous testing. Instead of the developer saying, yep, I'm done, the developer can have certain bits of it. They're like, okay, now this part's ready to test, I'm going to keep working. Now that part's ready to test, I can keep working. So the QA people can build their test stack or their test environment or whatever it ends up being as they go along, instead of getting this giant chunk of features thrown at them on a Thursday saying you better get that done by Friday.
Right.
Which traditionally happens in a lot of environments.
Cool. Thank you.
Awesome. So that's all the questions we have at the moment. So I'm going to end up handing back to you, Matt. But for everyone who's watching the live stream right now, just keep submitting your questions to theproductmentor.com/live. Post them to the Google Moderator channel, and I will make sure your questions make their way to Matt. And with that said, I'm going to hand it back to you, Matt.
Cool. So as I said before, to kind of finish up, these are kind of the reasons why we like feature flags. And so that kind of caps off the top of the pyramid. And so I want to talk briefly about lean startups in particular. Lean startup is a relatively complicated thing, but what I like about lean startups is the concept of lean startups, when we look at running hypothesis testing experiments and do releases and spikes and iterative and all this other kind of stuff, it fits really, really well with the lean startup, where I can change with feature flags and continuous deployment. I can change parts of my app for particular users. I've built all of this infrastructure that now allows me to be relatively lean. And so lean is all about the lean startup, which is separate from Kanban and kind of the lean production system. The lean startup talks about, okay, determining what features we build should also be lean. In a traditional context, a non-lean startup or a non-lean company, it's often done by, it's given to the product team from somebody else, and there's not a whole lot of experimentation and hypothesis-driven development. So I would also say that lean startups are not just for startups, if that makes sense. So Intuit, which is a multi-billion-dollar company, their CEO has said, we need to take more of a lean approach to the way we do product development. Just because we've hit product market fit, and just because we're a profitable company, certainly we have some risks and some assumptions which can now be, we can check them off as being resolved. But if I'm doing new product development, if I am enhancing a current product, I still should adopt the same types of approaches that the lean startup takes on my existing product, because I can be just as wrong in assuming that a feature is going to move some needle as I would when I had 2 users as when I have 20,000. And so I think based on the last week's or 2 weeks ago presentation as well on feature backlog prioritization, it would suggest a similar approach. So that's just a little diversion on lean. So again, to kind of sum it all up, we've got this thing called continuous delivery, and why do we want to do it? It gets the product to our customers and our stakeholders faster. I can finish a feature on a Tuesday at 2 o'clock, and by 2:02, it's in the hands of some of the users. It might not be all of them. It might be just my QA team. It might be just marketing, but it's gotten to somebody. It's gotten off of my machine as a developer and into the hands of my users. It allows, reduces disruption caused by bugs. So if I'm in the middle of cutting a release in the old model and I uncover a show-stopping bug, the whole process halts, everybody got to be all hands, and a bug is just another feature, it's just another item that comes into the top of the Kanban board, and I can take it, I can fix it, and I can have it released to the users. The product is more valuable because the product management can now focus on what experiments am I going to run, how am I going to run them, how am I going to get them in front of my users, how am I going to get this to 10% of my users and run this, how am I going to verify that this feature actually does what I said it was going to do. I told everybody that based on my hypothesis testing, changing the sign-up flow would move the needle in some particular direction. Now I can prove that without rolling it out to every single user. And it makes everybody happier because now PMs have an easier job. In some ways, they have a more complicated job because there's a little more moving parts, but it allows them to be more effective. It allows engineering to release with little overhead and little ceremony. That Etsy has a common theme where on the first day, every single person that joins the company has to do a deployment the first day at work. And there's a picture of, I think, one of their investors, maybe it was Fred Wilson, who's not a programmer, deploying a change to production when he was there, because their process is set up that anybody can do anything at any time. They know they didn't break anything. So QA is able to do just-in-time QA if you have that. Visual design, if you're doing lean UX, which I didn't touch on here, but you should look into it, is also positively affected by this. And so basically the whole product team, from PM all the way down to QA to engineering, and the rest of the business will be happier as well, because they're able to see work in process as it's going through the system. They can make course corrections if they feel like it. Marketing can start creating their release collateral a lot sooner than before. They know what's going to be in a release, and they can actually control it. So instead of going, well, put your finger to the wind to see what's going to be released next Friday, they can make the call on Wednesday and say, these are all the features that are ready to be turned on. Let's just turn them on Friday, instead of trying to negotiate with the product team to get a particular feature in by Friday so that they can, well, we've already written about it. Customer support likes it as well because they can help segment their support duties so that some of the power users that they have identified who really want a feature, they know who those people are who keep requesting it, and they can opt them into the beta of the feature. So instead of going, well, it's going to be released sometime next month, they can say, well, you know what, it's not quite ready, but because you wanted it and because you're such a valuable customer, I'm going to opt you into the beta and you can start playing around with it. What do you think about that? That's an incredibly powerful thing for customer support, to be able to deliver features that the customers have wanted much faster than they could before. And it helps upper management as well because they can see what's going on. They have a sense of progress is being made, and it just everybody's happier.
So yeah, I want to just pause you for a sec. I've got a question from Bob from the audience, so I'm going to read it.
Bob.
Bob's question is, how large are the features that you roll out in continuous integration, and how large is your team? Is it a single stream of release, and how do you manage feature dependency? I can break those down for you if it was too much just then.
So how large are the features? How long is the team? Is it a single stream? And how do you handle feature dependencies? Is that it? Okay.
It is.
So the features can be as large or as small as you want them to be. With the bane of every engineering project is a long-running feature branch. The longer you've got a branch of a feature going, the harder it is to do merges back in. You get merge conflicts, and so in product development, we tend to keep features small just as a general rule. However, if everybody's working off of master, I no longer have merge conflicts. I no longer have any of that integration hell that I would normally have within my team. So I would say features could be as large or as small as you need them to be. There is a concept of a minimum marketable feature, an MMF, which is a feature flag should wrap something that is substantial, because if you wrap every little tiny thing, you're going to have a feature flag file that's like, turn on the ability to edit the password, turn on the, it's oh gosh. So in general, you tend to put feature flags around things that are a little bit larger. You also need to make sure that you go back and clean those up. So once marketing or you have turned on a feature and it's in production, you need to create a task to go back and remove it from the file, remove the guards around the GUI, because otherwise you're going to have all these little fringes of if statements littered in your code, which will just be a mess. The teams, I've seen this personally work on teams of 3 people up to teams of 20 people, that's not one team, that's 3 teams. And it's really just as large as you can continue to work on a single code base. There are stories of I think at GitHub where there are teams of 50 people on a single project doing continuous integration anyway, not continuous deployment, but integration of feature branches. And so it doesn't appear to be a theoretical limit, although I suppose you've got 1,000 people working on a particular project, that might become a little bit of a headache. I would say you probably need to decompose it into services. So there's a larger discussion of what happens when software projects get too big, and you probably ought to decompose them at some point to clear APIs. But what I like about the feature dependency story is, instead of asking Bob where the feature is, or sorry, you're Bob, instead of asking Joe where the feature is, I can see it. It's on master. I can start coding against it if I feel like it. You need to work within your team as to, is this speculative or is it not? Traditionally, I have always done, if I'm doing speculative work, like I don't know if this is even like going to work, I don't put that on master, and I say I. The team doesn't put it on master. You might still have a flag for a speculative thing, or sorry, a branch. And if it turns out that whatever you're doing is junk, you just throw it away. So I don't think that changes. You would still do that in a normal development process. If you're just going to, play around with the code before you start working on it, you're not going to do that on master. But what I like about it is it essentially takes continuous integration to the next step of, well, everything's on master, so every commit is continuously integrated. And so if my feature depends on another one, I can watch it progress. And as soon as the line of code lands that I need to finish my feature, I can now go do that. Rather than going, okay, Joe, are you done yet? Are you done yet? Are you done yet? Are you done yet? So I hope that answers the question. There are some limits to large software projects that don't get any easier with this. So if you've got 10,000 people like Microsoft Windows or something, like I don't even know how you would release that. I just remember Microsoft Windows has a continuous integration process, but because the code is so large and there are so many teams, it could take a month or two before the code that somebody has already committed will eventually reach you, because it's this very hierarchical kind of construct. So, there are, as teams and projects grow, you hit some walls which this does not resolve. You need to kind of change the architecture.
Cool. So we got another question from Jeff in New York City. Someone's doing a little bit of interpreting of Jeff's question, but let me read it first. Jeff's question goes, my question is based mostly on whom I'm reporting to in terms of implementing this type of system. More often than not, it takes an educated person to understand this method, and historically my bosses are the owners, and they do not understand. So he kind of ends right there, but I think his question is maybe for the less technical or people that might be having some difficulty understanding the benefits or how to implement this. What kind of advice do you maybe have for Jeff and his challenging bosses?
Yeah, I think that goes a little bit to Christina's question as well. Is like, what's the biggest hurdle in getting people to adopt this? Is that it's not a conversation you can have where you can walk in and you go, we're going to start deploying continuously. Like that, that doesn't mean anything to anyone who's outside of a product context, and B, they're going to go, well, what does that mean? And you're going to say, well, we need to redo our test suite. We need to get QA to do just in time. We need to get design to do lean UX. We need to get product to do more hypothesis testing. I mean, it is a big, as I think the presentation might suggest, is that there are quite a few prerequisites to that to make that happen. And so I actually, the next slide in my presentation is a calculus-based example, so I'm not sure that somebody who is an uneducated person would be able to understand it, but it kind of talks about if releasing, the simple thing is if releasing once a month is good and releasing once a week is better, like why wouldn't releasing once or twice a day be even better? And that's kind of like a very layperson's kind of example of, let's be more effective. Let's spend more time on creating new features than the process around it. And so usually that's a pretty clear conversation to say, like, look, I'm spending all of this time doing release planning. I'm spending all of this time doing iteration planning. What if all of that went away and I was spending that 6 hours that the whole product team is spending on planning and they were doing feature releases instead? Like, that's a pretty powerful argument as well, is that you get a day back. I don't know about that, but you get some amount of time back that you can spend doing features rather than talking about stuff. So maybe that would be helpful. If your business, if your boss is not a product person, then a lot of things are hard, not just this. That's how I feel for you.
Oh boy. So I think that's all the questions we have at the moment. But again, to everyone watching the live stream, keep your questions coming to the productmentor.com/live, and I'll keep the questions going through. I know there's a few more slides, so you have an opportunity to get your last batch of questions in. And with that said, back to you, Matt.
All right. So as I said, here's why we like to do continuous improvement. It allows us to get product to customers and stakeholders faster. That might help the non-technical user to say, like, if I'm done with a feature on Monday, but we release on Friday, like, why can't I release it today? And I tend to think at less product or technically inclined managers tend to assume we're doing cowboy development anyway, where we're just releasing willy-nilly. So I think some of these arguments or some of these discussions might be easier because well, we're doing weekly releases because you told us to do weekly releases. Reduce disruptions, the product is more valuable, and everybody's happier. Okay, so here's the kind of calculus-based example that I mentioned before. So calculus, in a nutshell, is trying to calculate the area under a curve. And we want to do that for, I don't know, some strange reason why Galileo, I think, invented calculus. But we can approximate the area under a curve by drawing a rectangle, along some points of it. So we just do width or length times height, and we add up all of the squares underneath that, and that gives us an approximation of the area under a curve. So the smaller and smaller and smaller we chunk those boxes, the less our error becomes, and the more accurate our I guess you could say, estimate of the area under that curve becomes. And so kind of the same thing. The more frequently we deploy, the more value we're capturing underneath that curve. So if we think of the product landscape that we're working in as an unknown function of value that we're delivering to our users, the more frequently we can deploy, the better we can capture that actual value, because we don't know what this function looks like. And so if I deploy once every 6 months, I'm like step 1 of 1 in that first thing, where I'm either massively getting the over or underestimating the value. But the more frequently I deploy, the better I'm able to match that actual function of value that my product is matching. And so that's kind of like a strange way of looking at it. But for me, that kind of what solidified in my mind as an interesting analogy, which tends to, I don't know, it's kind of a geek analogy, but I thought it was fun. So I think I've hopefully have shown why we've accomplished all 4 of these bullet points. Again, I'm Matt Rogish, working with Jeremy and everybody on the Product Mentor and the product group here in New York, and A always, B delivering. So thank you.
That was great. That was great. So as always, the presentation that Matt just shared with us, we'll be posting that up on SlideShare. So stay tuned for that. Keep an eye on our SlideShare for all of our past PowerPoints and other presentations that other mentors have done. And a big thank you from me, Jeremy Horn, the product guy, and really everyone else who joined us in the room and elsewhere. Oh, wait, last minute question just came in, so I'm going to pause for 1 second. Christina?
Oh, just to kind of round it out, do you have any additional resources you'd recommend to read up on continuous integration, or the process, that the infrastructure you need to build up to make it possible for your organization?
That's a good question. So some of the tools are somewhat unique to your particular development environment and your language. So Python has a different one than, or could have a different one than Ruby or Rails or Java. So that dashboard that I showed of features that you can turn on and off, that's different for each language. I think most languages that I have seen have like a feature flag dashboard. So of grabbing feature flags, you could just do Ruby Rails feature flags, or Django feature flags, or PHP feature flags, and there should be a library out there that does this. Etsy has a code as craft blog, and Etsy is a fairly open company. They talk about their processes quite a bit. They talk about continuous deployment all the time, and I think there might even be on their blog a tag that you can click for continuous deployment, and you can see all of their resources where they talk about blameless postmortems. They talk about the metrics they look at and how they determine to turn a feature on or off or roll it back. How do you deal with data migrations as part of this? Obviously, the lean startup is a huge component of that as well. So Eric Ries, the lean startup. I think there's also a lean startup toolkit. I don't remember who wrote that, but that's a pretty interesting book as well. And then the Toyota production system. I have one that I like. I don't remember the author, but on Amazon there's quite a few highly rated Toyota production system books which give kind of an example of Kanban. The Wikipedia article for continuous deployment is not great, but it's not terrible. It's a good overview, and it suggests it's got some links, obviously, as Wikipedia does, and you can kind of follow it for hours, but it's got some of the high-level discussion, then you can kind of traverse Wikipedia to get to some of the more nitty-gritty. Other than that, let's see, who else is doing this? I'm not sure, but those are kind of the resources that I would suggest starting with. And obviously, feel free to, you certainly, but feel free to anybody who's listening to ask me any questions over email or Twitter or Skype or anything. Yeah, like I said, anything by Etsy on their tech blog is all focused around continuous deployment. Their product people will talk about how they've integrated it into their product processes, the engineering processes, QA, operations, and they're kind of the big one. IMVU is Eric Ries's old company that he wrote the Lean Startup from. They have a similar, IMVU. Continuous deployment, continuous integration. They will have a whole bunch of articles that have been written by them or about them that discuss in some detail how they do.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Cool. So that is actually all the questions now. So that's great, and those are great resources. And I just wanted to add, just at the end, anyone's interested in being a mentor like Matt, and to really a lot of product people like Christina, then definitely come to the productmentor.com. Sign up today. We can always use more mentors, and if you're a mentee who signed up, we're working on getting to you. And also, if you're looking to fill a new product job with a great product person, or you're looking for that product job yourself, definitely come and check out theproductjobs.com. It's a free job board all about product jobs and product people, just exclusive to that whole niche. It's a great one, great way to get found and be found. And with that said, again, everyone, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again soon on another Product Mentor Chat. Bye.